Snowlit, Prologue and Chapter 1. This is my first time doing a reading thing, guys, so sorry if it's horrible. I'm doing this mainly because my aunt and my girlfriend don't like reading, and I figure a lot of other people don't like reading, so I'm doing this.
Well, if you don't have time to read, or they're in a position where they can't read.
And that was Brian, if you can hear him. If not, then oh well. Anyway, Prologue. Could anyone tell how it felt to stand on the edge of a hill that was covered in fire, staring at a beast that was as large as a mountain, with eyes that were black with only the most malice intentions? How it felt to be filled with the fear that everything, your friends, your family, your home was gone. You could beg, you could cry to whoever, but that wouldn't do anything. The beast had consumed everything in fire, and everything was dead. The houses you once made, your home were burnt to ashes, and only the poor few you could save turned to you for help. Yet it seemed not even that was enough to stop this beast, who couldn't even be called a demon or a devil. It was a destructor, something that didn't care about its well-being. It only wanted to consume and destroy. That hilltop was the same one I stood upon, there and now. Maybe in a sense of worry that the same thing would happen again. There were many things lost, and a young teenage queen had been born. Yet there was still a sense of worry I could always feel. Would everyone be all right? Would I be able to protect them from the things that were considered the unknown and unforgivable? I might have been strong, but I wasn't invincible. And then I would find myself waking up in the middle of a sweat. Chapter 1. I could hear the fast beeping of my alarm clock as I rolled over in the bed. I wanted to sleep more, but it didn't look like that was happening ever I heard a click on the device. I turned around, my red eyes searching over the figure that had done so. Yawning, I raised my body and rubbed my eyes. A young man, looking to be in his 20s, stood by my bedside. His eyes were a deep green, and his light brown hair was soft-looking, falling over his ears, in a pretty boy-like fashion. His clean suit made my sleeping clothes look like rags as I stretched and pulled off the covers. "It's nearly time for the meeting. You should been up an hour ago, Ivy," the man said, with his two hands on his hips. "Right, Zakuro. But where's the meeting going to go? The moon and back?" I asked with a chuckle. The man's name was Zakuro. He lived in the mansion with me and 4 others who made up the elite team officials in the Lockwood country. Me being the queen of the entire country in a strange government that couldn't be called one thing or another. He laughed a little bit as I stood up and stretched. He left the room before telling me to hurry up or he would leave me here, so that my morning routine would commence in a noisy mansion household of the most important members of the country. The mansion sat on the far edge of the small town, consisting of 2 stories. It held me and 4 others who worked as my elite team. The upper floor had all the rooms and had 2 bathrooms across from each other in the outer hallway, not counting the bathroom in my own room. The lower floor consisted of living room, guest room, and a kitchen, along with a connection out to the garage that we used as a training ground for the twins. The house was off limits, unless your ID had the military symbol on it for the scanners to scan. It also required DNA samples from the tips of your fingers as well. With a toothbrush in my mouth, one of the twins came into the bathroom with a small book in her hand. That was Conan. She was fairly boyish, like her brother, considering they were twins and I was the only one who could tell them apart. I placed my hands against the sink and turned towards her. "Did you hear about the shooting downtown yesterday?" she asked, brushing back her purple-dyed hair. I placed a hand on my hip and used my right to take my toothbrush out of and spit into the sink. I guess that's what we'll be addressing in the meeting. Nothing really gets overturned, especially since Ashley is there. I placed the toothbrush away and wrenched out my mouth as Conan closed the small book. "Me and Kudo were wondering if we could go to the winter festival tonight. They say that there is going to be some amazing food." I laughed and patted her on the head. Kudo and Conan were only around 16 years old, but they were still rather small. Me, at 25 years old and standing at 5'11", I crouched down and set my hands on her shoulders as she fixed my bow tie. "All right. But keep your phones on, because you never know what could happen," I said, and ruffled her hair, heading out the door and towards the back of the house. Zakuro and Itsume were already gone for work. leaving me to lock the back door. The twins would probably lock the front when they went out. It wasn't that big of a deal after all. I stepped back into the snow and locked the door behind me before heading out to the Capitol building a few blocks away. Lockwood wasn't a very big country at the moment. We had to rebuild due to our old home being destroyed for the second time. Luckily, our construction team was the best, making the town full of around 500 people, a perfect size in a forest-like area. There was a lake around 2 miles out, and then past that was yet to be claimed territory. The world revolved around different dimensions, hence why there was no other countries here at the moment. Every dimension had their own set of universe, or otherwise set of rules, sometimes unless you were an exception to them. Creatures like me, a holy demon in which was a contradiction to itself, were exempt to the world's outlawed rules. Each universe had its own creatures, cultures, countries, and thought process built into it. Here at Lockwood, we were the misfits created from fire, and our country's job to make the outside sources who come into these dimensions into these dimensions didn't cause damage. There were some creatures who wanted to consume and destroy entire dimensions, let alone one planet or one sun within that dimension. This time of year, everyone was getting ready for Christmas. While it wasn't as religious as it used to be, it was still considered a time to celebrate the unity of family, to send gifts to another, and to receive them as well. The streets were lit up with trees already glowing in the night, and everyone was dressed in warm clothing to get into the snow. Even as I reached the courthouse building, the lights being set up looked like the most amazing thing in the world to me. I entered the main courtroom, where I met the leaders within the country. While the Queen and making final decisions was my end of the portion, supervisors were a non-limited position of superficials chosen by me and approved by vote in the society to keep things under control. At the moment there were 3 supervisors: Alan, my younger brother, Ashley, childhood friend, and Dakota, an old shifter friend of mine. Each supervisor had a captain and their personal assistants, as they called it. Most of them were human, but usually they could not be present during these meetings we held once a month. "Running rather late, aren't we, Ivy?" Ashley said, her green eyes glinting at me as I laughed, tugging at my bow tie. "She does it every time, not like it harms our business. At least the black-haired girl didn't run off this time," Alan commented as I sat down in my own seat. The way the room was designed was like a courtroom. The table was a thin crescent-type manner, whereas in the middle of the room was a pedestal where members of the society would stand trial if needed. Rarely was it needed here, since citizens were expected not to give each other trouble at all. If a disturbance was caused, said citizen would be held in prison for a few days. "So now that I'm here, why don't we discuss the events? Christmas is right around the corner. I've done my paperwork, so is there any cases you wanted me to look at?" I asked, crossing my arms impatiently. Ashley flipped through some paperwork as Dakota stood up, his white hair looking like a mess this morning. "There was a shooting near the edge of the residential area of the lakeside view. We wanted to ask you if you could investigate a family who reported the shooting after the meeting." The silver-eyed fox shifter looked at me from his end of the table. Dakota was a fine young man, around 30 years in age, and still looked like a teenager. He was 6 foot tall and could shift into a small gray fox. While having a big family, he was still rather convenient official, most likely the less impulsive of the group. Soon after he was speaking, Ashley handed me the file. The family was a mother, a father, and their 10-year-old son, Tanner, which brought my attention back to my younger brother, Alan. "This doesn't seem like that important of a case. Why didn't you just have my son look at it?" I asked and raised an eyebrow. "Relax, red-eyed demon. I ran it past him, and he said the details he figured you'd want to look at. Keep in mind, Prince Hajime has been doing double your paperwork in order for you to help with the festival." Alan, my younger brother, just as tall as Dakota, but with more masculine features and blue eyes. He had a scar under his right eye with long silver hair, fangs sharpened like mine. Sometimes it was difficult to have a younger brother as a supervisor, with his selfish banters. Though he meant well, he did it often to show off to everyone. They said that their son was a key witness. They're a fairly peculiar human family, so as we figured, you'd want to look at it. After all, we can all have something to drink at the cafe. Ashley was the most active leader in the group besides me, and my 17-year-old son, Hajime. She was the same age as me at 25, and her height was 5 foot 5 inches. Like Dakota, she was a different type of fox, except depending on the number of tails, she had a different number of lives. They call them spirit foxes. I met Ashley in middle school when the Earth Mansion was still around. She also became my personal doctor along with Alan's. Me and Alan are the only ones left of our kind, aside from my son, who is half human as a result from my late husband and second spouse at that. Scratching the top of my head, I took the file in my hands and stood up. If that's all you have, if that's all you need, then all right, I'll take a look at it. Don't be skipping off to the cafe, though. It's Alan's turn to pay. Leaving through the door, I headed to the right of the main street, in order to get to the ending of the town's residential area following the address on the paper. The house was a large 2-story residence, smack dab in the middle of a lane of houses on the edge of town, on the outlook a few miles away was the lake. The name of the area, Lakeview Houses, was exactly for that reason. The house was a slight purple tint color with blue accents. Giving the door a knock, I started to look over the paper, hearing yelling on the inside. I was wondering if everything was all right. Only for the door to be answered by a young human woman with long blonde hair and blue eyes, wearing a baggy t-shirt and ripped pants, looking like she was about ready to go to a party. "Hi, are you Sabrina? It's Queen Walker. I've come to collect data about the shooting," I asked, looking, or rather peeking, inside of the doorway. She leaned against the frame and obnoxiously chewed her gum. Of course, come in. My husband is just getting our son ready for bed." She invited me in as I stepped inside. It was nearly 2 in the afternoon. Why were they getting their son ready for bed at this hour? The house was rather nice. The kitchen was where I was led, and we sat at the table in the front of the sliding glass door that led outside, and a nice view of the forest and lake, along with a porch with various toys scattered about, probably from their son. Mark, the husband, set a cup of tea in front of me and sat down next to his wife. "So what is it you wish to speak about, Miss President?" the man asked. "Just a routine thing that we do when something suspicious happens." "Could you please tell me about the shooting that happened last night?" I asked, tapping the cup before politely taking a sip of it. The couple hugged each other, holding each other's hands as they began to explain to me what happened. "Well, we were outside yesterday eating lunch when it happened. Our 10-year-old son Tanner was playing with his toys when a man at the edge of the forest started to shoot a gun. The neighborhood was definitely in a frenzy. Me and my husband tried to take Tanner inside, but before we knew it, there were gunshots everywhere. Our neighbor Earl Wool, the shapeshifter, had to be hospitalized. When the military showed up, the shooter was gone." She gave a sigh and shook her head. The witness account was easy enough, but to me it sounded like a citizen who was being hostile, although it seemed odd for them to just vanish out of nowhere. As I finished my drink, I thanked the couple and stood up, only to see their son Tanner standing at the stairs with a small sculpture of clay within the confines of his hand. It was a very elaborate parrot, if I had to say so myself. It was an excellent sculpture that showed every single detail and painted very finely. Though my amazement was short-lived, as the mother suddenly gave out a gasp, walking over and stealing the sculpture from the boy's hands. "Tanner Mensley!" Her voice raised. I stood back, a bit dumbfounded. "We told you to go to bed and not touch anything. Do you understand?" She took a hand and slapped him with the back of it. I tensed a bit and looked at the woman with a questioning expression. I tilted my head as the father stood up and looked at Tanner. "Son, you stay inside tomorrow. Disobeying your mother is not something you do. Don't make me get the belt," he scolded in a stern voice. Tanner began to sob, his parrot destroyed, as the mother tore it to pieces, taking off its head. I watched as the boy ran upstairs, and then the couple composed themselves once more, holding hands and turning towards me. "We are sorry for that. Thank you for your visit, Miss Walker." I stopped myself, pulling up the clipboard and pulling my hands out of in confusion, gesturing towards the stair. "I don't mean to be rude, but wasn't that a bit over the top?" The woman suddenly turned her face to a scowl. It fit her far better than the corny smile, that was for sure. "Excuse me, Miss President, but isn't it a bit offensive to judge how a family teaches their children? We aren't all like you. Humans are far different from you demons." I was insulted by the girl. Ma'am, I may not be human, but I was raised by a human family. Last time I checked, if a child does something that amazing, you praise them for it, and being creative, encourage them to continue on. I have a 17-year-old son myself, and I've never treated him like that. You can't just judge someone on their species, I explained, with a confused expression upon my face. Well, we aren't all grimy wolf mutts, are we? The man commented, obviously referring to my wolf form, as I suddenly placed my free hand over my forehead. I'm sorry for the comment. Thank you for your input. I pushed myself past them and exited the house, sighing heavily as I dusted off my knees and headed towards the cafe. The cafe was near the market street, right next to the bookstore. It looked like everyone had already left, besides for my brother, who was sitting at one of the tables drinking his coffee. I could tell from the scent it gave off. Entering, I said hello to the clerk and took a seat across from him, dropping the files on the table and letting out a puff of air from my lips. You look like someone just punched you in the face, Alan said, taking another drink. It might as well have just been the same. That family's so odd, and the way they talked back to me. I rubbed my temple. Alan gave a chuckle, asking me what happened. I recited the events and waited for him to speak back to me. I'm surprised you held up. In a normal society, the Quinn have lopped off their heads for insulting you. I'm a bit insulted. Just because we can turn into wolves doesn't make us less human as they are. He said, his hands under his chin. Exactly. But it just bothered me how they treated the son. It's not like I could have just left him alone. Kids can't grow up so fast, and if forced to, it ends badly. I leaned back in the chair. Well, apart from your interesting event for the day, everyone's pretty much had plans and went home. Seems like the festival will be fun this year. Your son seems to be pulling most of the weight. He'll grow into a fine king, that's for sure. I laughed and crossed my arms. You're just jealous you'll never have a kid like that. Are you kidding me? You had a wife and a husband before I could even get my first girlfriend. Alan tapped the table when suddenly two men burst through the cafe doors, yelling at each other. Callan, I'm going to kill you, I heard the blonde catman say as his tan-colored tail flicking behind him. Oh, great. It was Sebastian and Callan. Callan decided to move around behind me as I stood up to block Sebastian from getting him. Sebastian looked like a normal man, skinny, attractive, with blonde hair and blue eyes, apart from the pair of tan-colored cat ears and tail. He was a normal citizen, but in the past he and I would go on field missions. That was before my younger sister was killed. He's trying to kill me, Ivy. You better do something about it. Arrest him for threatening a government official. Callan commented sarcastically as he crouched down, pointing at Sebastian. Callan was 19 years old, and he worked in the military to recruit members. He had purple hair and violet eyes. Boys, mind explaining to me what's going on before you cause more trouble? Oh, I'd answer her if I were you. The queen's in a bad mood after someone bad-talked her grimy mutt form. Alan laughed before getting up and leaving through the door. I hissed at him before returning my attention towards Sebastian. He left the door open when I was getting some papers for him. My son's companion cat got out, and now he refuses to look for it. Sebastian explained in a harsh tone as I tapped the taller man on his head. So you're throwing a fit because Tyke's cat got out? I asked, speaking the teenage boy's name. Callan gave a simple nod, and I sighed. Where'd she get out? I pulled Callan up from behind.